Hello, David Vose. It's August 26th, 2012, and it's Sunday. This is a continuation of the last two videos, and they're dealing with the subject of salvation. You know, I don't even like the word because a lot of the words that we have used in Christianity have just taken on meanings that are too religious, too unknowable. They're not like the word faith. We're not sure if it means to believe or to hope or to trust or what it means exactly. Salvation, that word doesn't mean in the Greek what it means in the English. In the Greek, the word just means to receive and be delivered from all that we've gotten ourselves into, and to be given back what will make us whole. So it's a much bigger word than salvation. Sin in the Bible doesn't mean what it means in the world that we live in the Christianity, because it seems like such a bad word, like you're a sinner. Wouldn't it be easier or kinder to say you've made a mistake? You say, yeah, but that's, the Bible doesn't say that. Yes, it does. The word in Greek for sin means to make a mistake. It doesn't mean to be evil or to be wretched or bad or, wicked, or I don't know where these words came from another time and place. But the Bible words like transgression, that Greek word means to fall off the path and go in another direction, or to veer off the path. There's words that are translated sin and wickedness and apostasy, and different words that we've taken to mean terrible things. But there are a series of words in the Greek that mean to aim for something and miss. There's the word to stumble. Our word apostasy means to stumble and fall down, but not just to stumble, but to actually fall down off the path. But you could still get up. They're more akin to our words like mistake and error. Sin would be better translated mistake or error. Anyway, moving on beyond that, these videos are about salvation and how we get salvation. And of course, everybody knows that there's these religions out there that tell you that you've got to have so many brownie points to be saved, or you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And then most religions now have said that all you need to do is believe in Jesus. But here's the problem. We're not saved. We were talking before in the other videos that Adam and Eve were saved. Okay, they were whole. They had God and His presence with them. And they had provided for them everything for life. The fruit of the garden provided for them in every way that they needed as human beings. And they didn't have their own righteousness because they were naked. But they weren't ashamed. They didn't have any shame or guilt. But God didn't require anything from them. So many people think that man rebelled, committed some great, terrible sin, and rebelled against God, and God was angry with them and demanded blood. Somebody's got to die. But that's not what the Bible really teaches. Let's take a look at what actually happened and see how that is different from what we've just said and what people have thought in their minds. when they ate from a tree that gave them knowledge of what is good, till they could become like God, they began to realize immediately when they began to partake of that knowledge that they were not good, that only God was good. And they began to feel shame. And it was that shame that made them run and hide. God in his love immediately ran and killed an animal and put the hide over them to cover them. God was saying right then and there, I want you to be covered. I don't want you to run and hide from me. God knew what Adam and Eve had done, but when he came walking up there, he said, where art thou? What have you done? Have you eaten from the tree in which I told you not to? He didn't say, I know you did something evil. You're an evil Adam, and I don't like you anymore. Get away from me. I don't, No, but Adam ran and hid. You've got to understand that it was Adam that could no longer be in God's presence because he felt shame. And it was God who had already said, you don't need to feel shame. You don't need to partake of knowledge that you're not good enough. You're good enough. I love you. Here's a garment. But it wasn't enough for Adam because it was not a perfect covering. It was a temporary covering, and it required killing an animal. But it says, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son that we might have life. So in this case, God so loved Adam that even though Adam felt so ashamed that he couldn't be in God's presence, that God wanted to get back into his presence so bad, he was willing to give up this little sheep to cover Adam. And so the sacrificial system started because we couldn't get back to the garden. We couldn't get back into God's presence. And we couldn't receive because we had no faith. We had all this shame. We couldn't go with boldness to God and say, God, help us. So we didn't feel worthy. And so therefore we couldn't go into the presence of God and receive the bounty and the blessings. So out there in the world where there was winter and the curse upon the ground, where it produced nothing but thorns and thistles, and we ate lechem, or bread, cooked food until we died. It toiled and toiled. Out there in that formidable suffering that we ourselves banished ourselves to because we didn't feel worthy, God set up a covenant or a relationship not as good as the one he had in the garden, but we weren't willing to go to the garden and eat the fruit. We didn't have that boldness. We felt shame. So God said, listen, you feel this shame. You can't get back to the garden. So while you're in this condition, there's sheep. You can use them. But remember that the sheep's going to give you food and covering, but at a price. Because it's going to bother your heart when you kill that sheep and it cries. And the blood is going to run out. So I want you to recognize the animal had to die for what you're getting. But I love you and I want you to eat and be clothed. But that animal had to die. And so I want you to pour out the blood. You're not allowed to eat blood. And you pour it out on the ground. That's where sacrifice began. We sacrificed an animal in order for us to live. And it was a covenant of food and shelter. Just like the original covenant was the tree of life and the garden and the trees of life and the water of life. And the new covenant that we're under now with Christ is also that Christ will provide us. He says, I shall give you living waters that will bubble up into eternal life. I will give you the bread that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man. I came to give you sustenance, to protect you, to bring you back into that relationship just like you had in the garden. And you don't need to do anything because it's because of my grace. So this is what the Bible's trying to teach us. And that's why when they went into the land of well, everybody knows the story of Israel in Egypt. Egypt represented the building, like Babylon, the building of pyramids and towers and edifices and spiritual, trying to get to God. So it's a spiritual thing. That's why Egypt, to many Christians, have always represented the bondage to sin. And Babylon has always represented religious bondage. But really they were the same basic thing. The Israelites had been in bondage, building through human effort these edifices. And when God delivered them, they didn't deliver themselves. God, by an outstretched arm, in other words, by his own power and his mercy, not by our effort, but by God's power, his right arm, his favor, he yanked us out of Israel, or out of Egypt, out of slavery, by a miracle, by plagues that attacked Pharaoh, the devil, and his demons, and all that holds us and binds us to this illusion, these fears and these troubles and these things that binds us, this worry and our human effort, the toil, the slavery. And God delivered us freely. He caused the miracles. The parting of the Red Sea was God's divine mercy and power. We were saved by his mercy and power. And when we got to the desert, what did we do? God provided water from a rock. And Paul says that was Christ. It represented that we get water or sustenance from Christ. And God gave them bread from heaven called manna. But it says that the children of Israel murmured. And they murmured and complained. And they did it twice. Once they murmured and complained because they didn't like, they said they wanted to go back to Egypt where they had meat. They lusted. They didn't care about slavery. They wanted slavery. They didn't want to be free. They didn't want this life of grace. They wanted the life of bondage. They wanted to eat and lust after the flesh. And so God was angry with them and sent them quail. For 40 days they ate nothing but quail, and it was quail all over the camp. And they ate so much quail, it says it came out their nostrils, and many of them died. And later on they murmured and complained because of the manna. They didn't like it. It's simple food. And it says God sent serpents among them. Fiery serpents. And they were seraphs, which is the same word as the seraphim in heaven. Because the cherub, or the serpent, the dragon, the devil was a serpent. But that's beside the point. Another issue that I want to talk about in another video. But these serpents bit them and were biting them and killing them, and many of them were dying by the serpents. So they complained to Moses, said, "Take these serpents away." And so God told them to build a copper, brass serpent and put it on a pole, on a tree. And they lifted up, it says they lifted up this pole with the serpent on it. And whoever would look at the serpent would be saved, and they wouldn't die. And so in the New Testament, it says, in the book of John, it says, so too, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, that the people might look upon it and be saved. So now, whoever looks upon Christ, lifted up on that cross, will be saved. Why? Because Jesus came in the likeness of sinful flesh and died. And I don't got much time. I've got less than a minute to finish this. And I want to do it in this thing. That serpent that was wound around that tree in the knowledge of good and evil is the flesh and the frequencies and the lower frequencies that lust of our body that keep us in bondage. And it was Jesus that took those bodily frequencies and nailed them to the cross. Well, I'm getting more time, but I'd like to talk more about this serpent that was raised up and I'd like to talk about our salvation in the next video. And this is David Vose, and I hope that you're beginning to understand that we are saved by grace and not by any works of ourselves. This is David Vose signing out, and have a great day.